Hello, and welcome to Kata Tips and Tricks, Episode 2. In the last episode, we provided several suggestions for the general practice of kata. In this episode, we'll specifically discuss the improvement kata. So let's get to it. Our first tip involves step 1 of the improvement kata, providing direction. Dr. W. Edwards Deming always said that improvement efforts should be directional. This is important because it aligns the various improvement efforts in the organization or in particular areas of the organization. Senior leaders always tell me that they are seeking alignment. In the simulation that we use in the University of Michigan workshop Kata for Daily Improvement, there are 4 assembly stations, as well as a stockroom and material handling. I always ask the participants to think of those stations as different departments, each with their own supervisor, team members, equipment, and the like. How do we ensure that each department working on their own improvements are aligned with their efforts? With a common direction, of course. Each department shares a common challenge in the simulation. While one department is working on quality issues because their current conditions warrant this, another department may be working on work and process issues because their current conditions direct them to do so. Though working on very different process changes, the efforts are aligned by a common challenge. Management must provide this challenge. I have seen organizations overlook this important part of the practice of the improvement kata. When I ask why, it is usually something to the effect that senior management hasn't provided one, or at least not explicitly. People don't want the lack of direction to stand in the way and they press on. However, most often with a little discussion with senior leaders, a direction can be ascertained. Then we are assured more proper practice. It is important that learners throughout the organization understand the direction when practicing process improvement. It provides purpose to the practitioner, which helps them overcome the hurdles that they will encounter. It gives them a big picture view, which is also helpful for developing system thinkers. Therefore, it cannot be overlooked. Step 2 of the improvement kata is to grasp current or actual conditions. This is true of all improvement methodologies, whether it be value stream mapping, A3 storyboards, or the like. Nonetheless, we must understand that this is a skill that must be developed. Closely observing a process, collecting data from a process, these are all acquired skills. We see this often on-site practicing the improvement kata, but also sometimes in the University of Michigan workshop simulation. One example of the difficulty of this is what I call no pattern is pattern. Learners will come back from the focus process, the process that they are working to improve, frustrated. I can't get good process times. They are all over the place, they might say. We'll return together the process and closely observe and identify patterns by which the current process behaves. I remind learners that it is not just about gathering data such as process times, but the act of timing forces us to look more closely at the process to learn what is really going on. And that is the real purpose of grasping current conditions. And devoting sufficient time to grasp actual conditions is absolutely necessary. Sometimes I suggest that they put away the stopwatches and simply observe. Yet another example of this is when I ask what someone has learned after observing a process. They start mentioning the need to apply various lean tools. We need to 5S the workstation. There is no standardized work. There needs to be visual management, and so on. This is not learning. I also encounter a reluctance to go see firsthand. This is usually the case for managers, particularly for managers who, in the past, have not spent much time at the gemba, as they say. They'll defer to historic data or reports from a computer system. People will know that I'm watching. I'll get better data from the computer. Such people will tell me. This is not what we mean by grasping current or actual conditions. Again, it is not just the data, but what our eyes see. When I was first developing my skills for observation back in the early and mid-1980s, I did not see 1/10 of what my mentor or mentors on this subject saw. But with enough practice and coaching, I slowly improved my abilities. I learned to use all my senses and not just my eyes. In time, I could coach others to develop their observation skills. When teaching observation skills, coaches will need to be more directive in the beginning. We'll discuss this more in episode 3. Besides the skill of observation, the learner needs to develop various quality management skills. This includes identifying what data is to be collected, how much to collect, how best to display it, and how to identify patterns in the data. Again, these are skills that are best taught using traditional methods and not the coaching kata, which uses a series of questions. One cannot ask a learner enough questions to where they can create a run chart or even to time a process. The coach has to demonstrate how to perform these tasks. We'll discuss this more in episode 3. I have seen where learners really struggle with the basic quality tools, and it is no fault of their own. No one ever really showed them how to use them. Coaches, who are often CI professionals to begin with, often forget what it took them to learn. Therefore, I sometimes find a reluctance to use the basic quality tools, and even their total absence from the storyboards and the process. Step 4 of the process is to practice PDCA when performing experiments, the process changes that the learner deliberately makes. I have observed that learners in time will do a fine job with PDC, but not so much the A, the act to make standard. One of the impressive abilities of Toyota is the ability to achieve and sustain standardized work. Learners cannot forget this important step once sufficient experimentation has been done with a particular process change, and it is desired to standardize and sustain that change going forward. Continuing with the discussion of experimentation, I have seen several misunderstandings here. I have people argue with me that only experiments that reside completely and totally in the area of responsibility of the learner are permitted in Kata. Only experiments that the learner alone can conduct. I do not know where people pick this up, but it is not true. It is about rapid PDCA or rapid learning cycles. True, an experiment that can be performed solely by the learner is more likely to be done quickly, but this does not preclude involving others in an experiment. We see this in the University of Michigan workshop. People talk themselves out of an experiment in an assembly department because it means involving others such as material handling or the stockroom. As I often say, it never hurts to ask. Again, the goal is rapid PDCA cycles. To this point, the learner should always look to break down more lengthy experiments. The objective of any experiment is to learn, to expand one's threshold of knowledge. To that end, gathering information is a valid experiment, albeit not a sophisticated scientific one. Nevertheless, it lends itself to rapid practice of PDCA. When a learner tells me that it will take me a few weeks with regard to a proposed experiment, I will respond, what can you do in the next week to expand your threshold of knowledge? With some thought, the learner can almost always think of a step or two that they can complete. At times, the question gives rise to a very creative approach to the experiment, quick and simple rather than some elaborate experiment. To this point, it is suggested to practice single-factor experiments. In other words, change one process feature at a time. This usually allows for more rapid experimentation. It is certainly easier to change one factor than multiple factors. In addition, it can help the learner. When multiple factors are changed, it is more difficult for the learner to understand what exactly has happened. It can actually cloud the learning process. Learners are also more likely to perform simpler experiments. This is particularly true of new or inexperienced learners. Changing one factor is less risky. With more practice comes more confidence, which can allow for more complicated or sophisticated experiments in the future. As those of you who have practiced Kata, you know that storyboards are used. Storyboards are a thinking device that help the learner with proper practice and can give the coach a peek into the thinking and practice of the learner so that proper coaching can be provided. But the storyboard must be kept up to date to be effective. The learner must update the storyboard before each coaching cycle. Otherwise, the cycle should be rescheduled until it has been updated. This may seem like a simple tip, but I find it to be often overlooked. Practitioners will also be familiar with the use of the PDCA cycle record. It is an excellent form that the author created, if it's properly used. Each row of the record represents a single experiment. On the far left column, the learner will write in the action or experiment he or she will be conducting. The second column, from the left, prompts the learner to predict what they expect to happen. This develops diagnostic thinking in the learner. The coaching cycle is then prompted prior to the experiment being conducted. In this way, the PDCA cycle record interlocks the two routines or kata. After the experiment has been completed, the learner completes the two right-hand columns. These will be covered in a moment. The learner then uses what they learn to plan for the next experiment, which will be noted on the second row, and so on. The learner should exhibit what I call logical linkages from experiment to experiment, using the knowledge gained to conduct the next experiment. An issue that I have seen with the use of the PDCA cycle record is that learners attempt to fill out multiple rows at the same time. They create a sort of action plan with all of the steps expected to be taken. However, this would not be proper practice. Kata should be practiced one step at a time. A learner need not predict how the improvement effort will take place. It is about using the learning from one experiment to determine the next experiment, as the learner expands their threshold of knowledge. Another concern I have observed is the lack of specificity of the information written on the form. The learner must be very specific throughout the use of the record. This is a characteristic of seasoned practitioners. First, it helps the learner clarify for themselves their thinking, their actions, and their learning. Second, it allows for more effective coaching cycles. Third, it captures valuable learning that the learner may need to refer to in later improvement kata cycles. To this point, clarifying what the result of an experiment is different from what the learner has learned as a result. Result is not the same as learning. I often see learners write down the new process time or some new quality related data in the result column. Then in the what have you learned column, they note statements such as it was faster, it was better, and the like. However, this is not what we are looking for from the learner. Close process observation is required beyond measurable results. How has the pattern of the process changed? What did the learner see? Learning may involve the identification of a new obstacle, or that what was thought to be an obstacle really wasn't one. It is not just another way of describing the result. Our final tip is for the learner, who usually is a supervisor or manager in the beginning of the practice of kata. Prior to conducting an experiment, the learner should engage others, particularly their team members who will be part of or affected by the changes that will be made. In this way, the learner can begin to develop the understanding of others in the improvement kata. He or she can review the storyboard, the PDCA cycle record, and any quality tools that are being used. In other words, they can share the learning about the kata process with others. Learning together, as I like to say. I have found a reluctance of learners to do this. They often tell me, I'm just learning. I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. I suggest that they be forthcoming with their team members. Let them know that you are in a learning process and you want to share what you are learning. People will understand this. That brings episode 2 to a close. The key points from this episode are: 1. Leadership must provide the direction. It is an important part of this process and cannot be overlooked. 2. Grasping current condition takes time and skill. It is not easy to do, and a coach may need to use more traditional techniques to teach these skills to a learner. The learner and coach need to be patient and devote the necessary time. Number 3, it is about rapid experimentation. Rapid experimentation means rapid learning cycles and the quicker development of the learner's skills and mindsets. Number 4, keep the storyboards up to date. They are less useful if not kept up to date. Number 5, use the PDCA cycle record properly. We covered 3 tips in the use of the PDCA cycle record: 1 step or row at a time, be specific, and be sure to distinguish the result from the learning. It is an important and valuable tool. Please use it. And 6, encourage the learner to engage their associates. begin to spread the knowledge of the improvement kata. After all, team members are often part of the experiment that is about to be conducted. They should understand the process in which they are a part. Many of the team members will be future learners as well. Why not begin to develop a foundation of understanding? In the next and final episode, we will provide tips and tricks for the coaching kata. I hope that you found the information provided helpful and that you will join us for episode 3. Goodbye.